Okay, let me start now. So, hi everybody. I'm Ken Stern. I'm the director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate. I welcome you to our webinar today, and I'm really excited for what we're going to learn. I, in the summer, saw an article in Inside Higher Ed about Simon Cullen and Nick DiBella and the work that they were doing really to use technology to help students discuss across deep divides. And that's something obviously that in a center we focus on hate, having those types of discussions that don't dehumanize but actually can talk across divides is critically important. And certainly in the last year, since what we've seen in post-October 7th world. And I think it's even more critical now in the post-election world to have those skills, and for college students in particular. So I'm not a person who has great faith in technology. I think more about ideas and how they affect identity. But I was just blown away by that article and then talking to Simon and Nick about what they've been able to do with technology, because what they've done, and they will walk you through this in their program called Sway, is make it so that students can actually engage with each other without the eye rolls, without the ad hominem attacks, without the raised voices, and to get to the core of where their disagreements are, and to do it in a way that allows them to empathize across divides, allows people to hear the other side of why somebody who they want to write off as evil or stupid has a point of view that they can articulate the reasons for. So I've been delighted to have them here today. And let me do a quick introduction to both Simon and Nick, and then I'll turn it over to them. What we're going to do is they're going to talk for about a half hour or more. As it's happening, you can put questions in the Q&A. I will moderate that at the end. But also what they will do at the end is talk to you about an opportunity, which I think is just wonderful, for you all to use this technology. We can't do it in the course of the webinar because of how the webinar is set up, but each of you will get tomorrow an email with instructions about how to use the technology and how to connect with them. And I think you'll be as blown away as I am by it. So further ado, let me give you the introduction. Simon Cullen is a faculty member and Dietrich College AI and Education Fellow at Carnegie Mellon University. He developed the award-winning Dangerous Ideas in Science and Society course at CMU, helping students to explore diverse viewpoints on polarizing topics by teaching them the art of constructive disagreement. His research combines philosophy, cognitive science, and educational technology to improve reasoning, communication, and understanding across moral and political divides. His work has been published in Science Advances, Nature Science of Learning, Cognition, and the Review of Philosophy and Psychology. He holds a PhD from Princeton University and has a background in the psychology of reasoning, reasoning pedagogy, and philosophy of cognitive science. Nick DiBella is an intelligence community postdoctoral research fellow based in the Department of Philosophy at Carnegie Mellon University. His research spans epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of probability, with a focus on developing methods to improve reasoning and communication in contexts involving uncertainty. His work has been published in the Philosophical Review, Philosophy of Science, and Syntheses. He holds a BS in physics from MIT and a PhD in philosophy from Stanford. Drawing on his interdisciplinary background, Nick works at the intersection of philosophy, cognitive science, and artificial intelligence to enhance decision-making and foster constructive dialogue across diverse perspectives. Anyway, Simon, Nick, welcome. Floor is yours.
Simon, I think you're muted.
I got it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation and this opportunity. It is a real pleasure to be here to talk to you about our work. So like Ken mentioned, my research uses tools from philosophy and cognitive science to improve how people reason and communicate.
And I'm DiBella. So excited to be here. So excited to show you what we've developed.
Great. So today we're excited to introduce you to Sway, which is our chat platform that harnesses AI to, like Ken mentioned, help students have better conversations across even their deepest differences. So we've really developed Sway to embody the principles of free expression and constructive disagreement.
Absolutely. And we really want to see how you can take this new technology and be creative with it to teach students really what's the art of constructive disagreement. And we're very interested to hear your thoughts about how Sway could be used to fight hate. Okay, let's just quickly begin by going over the plan for today so you know what you're getting yourself into. So first, we will tell you a bit about how Sway grew out of our teaching and research on depolarization. We'll explain exactly what Sway is and talk about our philosophy of constructive disagreement that went into the design of Sway. Next, we're going to give you a demo of Sway and present some promising data from our early empirical studies.
Okay, and then finally, like Ken mentioned, we won't be doing, you won't get to play with Sway yourself today as we had planned, but you will be getting an email and we really hope you'll follow up on that. So we'll have a little more time for Q&A, which is awesome. And then we'll wrap up also with next steps, like Ken mentioned about, if you're interested in trying to give students these opportunities to practice constructive disagreement, then we'll be really happy to help you do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've tried to make Sway an attractive app that students will actually want to use, and we hope that you will use it with your students. And Sway is, as we said, part of our research on constructive disagreement and depolarization. And our goal is to give this research, to share this research with educators for free.
Right. And that's why we're extremely grateful to our donors and the support that we've received from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation. They've made it possible for us to just let educators and students all over the country start to have these discussions.
Okay, Simon, do you want to say a bit about how all of this got started?
Yeah, so I'm sort of known for being someone who's kind of obsessed with disagreement. I think of disagreement as a very powerful source for learning. So a major source of inspiration for Sway came from this class that actually Ken mentioned, Dangerous Ideas in Science and Society. That was a class that I designed to engage students in intellectually serious discussions of challenging topics, including moral, social, and political issues. And you can see some of the topics here. The class starts by addressing the speech culture on campus itself, the speech culture on campus itself. But we also talk about genetic engineering, genetic enhancement. We talk about the ethics of abortion, but not only abortion, also infanticide. We cover euthanasia in this class. We talk about a whole unit on gun rights and arguments for and against gun rights. We talk about transracialism. Think of characters like Rachel Dolezal. And then finally, we also discuss the problem of evil and the existence of God. So why do I teach these topics? I had to axe units, readings, topics that I love from my syllabus. The reason why I did that was because when I asked students about their experiences of the speech cultures in their high schools and at CMU, they say things like this.
At school, I knew that I shouldn't ever try to talk about controversial topics.
When my parents sent me to CMU, they told me to stay silent about controversial topics.
I don't support certain liberal ideologies, but I cannot and will not ever let anyone except for my closest friends know that.
Now, I'm just going to pause the share for one moment because I'm going to switch slides. So just give me 1 second. Hopefully, it'll only be a second. Okay. All right, we are back. And share. All right, beautiful. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Great. So I poll students anonymously at the beginning of every topic that we cover. And I do this to try and measure their attitudes about the topic, but also their confidence in their attitudes. So one thing I found very consistently is that although very few students have thought deeply about the issues that we discuss in my class, that does not stop them from having passionate moral opinions about them. So we can see here, for example, at the beginning of the course's discussion of arguments concerning abortion, I ask students to say how confident they are in their views. As you can see, we start off with over half of the class saying they feel very or extremely confident, and under 15% saying they're not at all or only somewhat confident. Now, in this lecture, I don't try to argue for one side or the other. As always, I'm quite careful to make sure students don't really know what my personal views are. I just begin sketching the arguments. Well, a 50-minute lecture is all it takes to open students' minds before they go off into those discussion sections. At the end of that lecture, you can see around 40% of students say they're not at all or only somewhat confident, which is a 2.5-fold increase in around 50 minutes. This is a pedagogical consequence of the censorious and intolerant speech cultures that these students have grown up with. They've missed what I think of as critical intellectual developmental milestones of argument and debate. So we see the same thing. One of the more controversial lectures I give is the one on transracialism. As you can see at the beginning, under 10% of students believe that it's possible for a person to transition away from their race assigned at birth, if you like. But after that lecture, where students are introduced to philosophical arguments like Rebecca Tuval's, around 1 in 3 students then will agree that it's possible to transition between races. Finally, before I give a lecture on pro-gun rights, around 40% of students strongly support banning civilian gun ownership, but after 50 minutes of just reviewing some data and listening to arguments, less than 10% of students strongly support banning guns. So for many students, lectures, and especially those featuring these guest speakers, can have a really profound impact on their confidence. I want to show you a short reflection from 2 students about the unit on abortion. So I invite a professor who's a pro-life philosopher and a conservative legal scholar to class to defend his pro-life arguments. And here's a student reflecting on that meeting.
As a strong liberal, I have always disregarded pro-life people as a bunch of misogynists who want to oppress women. But after that lecture, I realized that there is so much more behind the pro-life versus pro-choice slogan. Although listening to the guest speaker did not change my viewpoint, it made me reflect much deeper on what I actually support and believe in. At the end of the day, I came out as a more rational and morally consistent person who has a much deeper understanding about my pro-choice belief and how to defend my position. I have also come to the realization that maybe pro-life people are not the evil misogynists that I believe them to be, and I am more willing to sit down and listen to their point of view.
So the reason I'm sharing these quotes with you, and I've got so many more that I'd love to share, but I won't. The reason I'm sharing this with you is just because I want you to have a really evocative sense of how these kinds of discussions, how exposing students to opposing perspectives in a serious and intellectually respectable way can have really transformative experiences. So, okay, I'm gonna just show you one more thing and then we'll do a switch back. So at the beginning of the semester, before students come into my class, I ask them how comfortable they would feel expressing their views about controversial topics across a range of contexts. And you can see here, only 8 to 19% report feeling comfortable across these 3 contexts. Now, what about when I ask them about a situation where we've specifically set things up to directly address these kinds of topics, and we've established norms of respect and charitable interpretation? Well, the fraction of students who feel comfortable talking to the teaching team quadruples. Classroom discussions are transformed. The number of students who are comfortable goes from under 30 to 85. And finally, students really get the message that we welcome all perspectives if they are argued for. Under 5% of them are worried about being punished for their views. We also find students begin thinking quite differently about encountering offensive or intolerant ideas on campus. At the beginning of the semester, 60% say it is important that they are not exposed to such ideas. By the end, that number is cut in half. And finally, we managed to do all of this while maintaining a very high level of respect. These sorts of interactions can have really profound transformative effects on students. So I'm going to just show you one more.
When I went to recitation, I couldn't believe that I could share my viewpoints without being shunned or hated.
This has been most likely the only class that I've taken at CMU that has changed the way that I will go about my life now that it's over.
So now we're at the end of the course. One thing I'm reflecting on is how much I've changed as a person and how much more open-minded and prepared for productive discussions I am.
Despite the little influence this course holds on the majority of my studies, it proved to be the most influential for my day-to-day life.
Okay, I'm going to now just switch this back here. Just one moment. Okay, and now we're back.
This has been most likely the only.
Okay, cool. Apologies, everyone. Had a last minute change of plans there. Can everyone see my screen again now? Yep. Okay, great. So obviously the big question that this course raises is, can it be done at scale? So I taught 200 students last time I did it, and I had 16 teaching assistants to help me. I had to train all of those assistants to moderate these kinds of discussions. So Nick?
Yeah. So it's very difficult to carry out such discussions at scale because there are not, at least with instructors like Simon, there's not a lot of instructors like Simon that are so good at managing these discussions. And so we asked ourselves, can we take the lessons learned from Simon's course and tailor and fine-tune the latest AI models to replicate or even enhance the student experience at a massive scale? In short, can AI help students everywhere engage with dangerous ideas? Well, Sway is our answer to that question. It's not just an AI assistant or a chatbot. It's actually a messaging platform like iMessage or WhatsApp, except that it adds AI guidance to every chat. First, Sway helps people with their language before their messages are sent. Suppose someone tries to send a message that's inflammatory, but still attempts to convey some idea worth discussing. Our AI automatically detects this and suggests a charitable rephrasing of the message. These rephrasings aim to capture the content and even the emotional tone of the original, but in a more constructive way. And this immediate feedback helps students learn how to express themselves better. And you'll see it in action in the demo that we have coming up in a bit. The second way that Sway supports constructive disagreement is through what we consider to be the real star of the show, which is Guide. Guide is Sway's AI mediator. It's actually an active part of every Sway chat and contributes in much the same way that a human mediator would. Guide's an expert moderator, peacekeeper, reasoner. The list goes on. It can really do a lot. And you'll see Guide in a bit when we do the demo shortly. But before we do that, we want to talk just a bit more broadly about our philosophical approach to AI-mediated discussion. So Simon and I are both philosophers, and we can't help but to say a few words by way of philosophy. So the heart of our approach is a radically different way of thinking about speech. Instead of the traditional distinction between hate speech and not hate speech, we prefer to think of speech as forming a spectrum from constructive speech on the one end to unconstructive speech on the other. And some types of unconstructive speech call for different responses than other types.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Sway is an expression of J.S. Mill's conviction that any topic, any view, no matter how orthodox or heterodox it might be, should be discussed and debated and defended and interrogated in a deep and intellectually serious way. And so that's why we are so focused on clear reasoning and not merely on just keeping things civil. But Sway does impose some constraints on the language people use.
Yeah, and that's because there are a lot of ways to undermine the very possibility of constructive dialogue. And that's why, for example, Sway will not allow users to send slurs, not because we believe they should be universally banned, but because human beings respond to them in a way that's completely counter to productive conversation. If saying something is going to undermine the very goal of a Sway chat, which we regard as understanding and engaging deeply with a differing viewpoint, then we consider that speech to be irredeemably unconstructive. That's also why Sway blocks mere insults and mere personal attacks. These are insults and personal attacks that don't even attempt to further the conversation. The goal of our research with Sway is to create environments where even highly controversial topics can be discussed and debated, but with guardrails that promote understanding and rationality rather than hostility and polarization. It's a delicate balance that until recently only highly skilled human moderators could manage. Okay, so now let's finally take a look at the app. So suppose that you wanted to give your students a discussion assignment on the topic of Israel-Palestine. So when you create the assignment on Sway, you, the instructor, will configure some topic statements that you want the students to talk about if they disagree.
So then what students do when they begin the assignment is they'll get a quick opinion quiz. That's what we call it, the opinion survey.
Opinion survey.
It'll elicit their views on the topic statements, and it will then use students' views to pair them into groups with as much viewpoint diversity as possible.
Yeah, now for this demo, we're going to show you a sway chat between Simon and me where we role play on opposite sides of this debate. Now, normally a user of Sway would only see their own window, but for this demo, we're going to show you Simon's perspective on the left and my perspective on the right. Now, to clarify, the messages sent by the characters, Nick and Simon, in this demo were constructed purely for illustrative purposes and should not be interpreted as reflecting our actual views.
Great. Okay, so every chat starts with Guide, the AI mediator, introducing the topic. Guide says, hello, users, announces the topic, which in this case is Israel-Palestine, and more specifically, that the US should prioritize Palestinian rights and stop sending weapons to Israel. And in this conversation, we're having Nick agree with the statement and Simon disagree with the statement. Okay, so now I'm going to show you this. Here we go.
And let's have Nick start off by coming in really hot. So Nick's going to start just by saying, so why do you support the Zionist genocide in Gaza? Really not the best way to start this conversation. It's quite accusatory. It's presuming that Simon supports a genocide. Sway's AI has detected that this message could be improved. So at this point, Nick's going to get a suggestion. Do you support the existence of Israel? If so, how do you justify the deaths of so many innocent women and children in Gaza? Definitely a lot better, less accusatory, more potentially productive. But if Nick doesn't like this rephrase, then he can just refresh it and get another one. Do you endorse the deaths of innocent Palestinians in Gaza as a result of Israeli military actions? Let's have Nick accept that one. Okay. Now Simon's going to respond. Well, I support Zionism, but I don't believe it is Zionism that's responsible for the conflict. So at every part of the conversation, Guide's in the background trying to decide whether or not to come in, and if so, how to come in. At this point, Guide says, Nick, I appreciate you jumping into the discussion, and rightfully notes that there's an even more constructive way of beginning the conversation by, instead of assuming something about Simon, asking a question instead. Simon, could you elaborate on your view of Zionism and explain why you don't believe it's responsible for the conflict? Simon says, I don't support everything the Israeli government does. For me, Zionism is just the idea that there should be a Jewish state in Israel. Now, Nick comes in, but how could you support that when Israel has been so violent and so oppressive? Are you watching the news? So this is a rather confrontational message to send, but not quite at the level where we need to rephrase it. But now Simon is getting quite upset. Maybe if the Palestinians stopped attacking innocent Israelis, there could finally be peace. Ever think of that? And then with an eye roll emoji. Like Nick's message from before, this is not the most productive way to proceed with a conversation. So at this point, Simon is now presented with a suggestion. Let's see. Peace between Israelis and Palestinians will only be possible if the Palestinians stop targeting Israeli civilians. It's important to address this root issue. A much better way of saying what Simon was trying to express. But when you get a suggestion, you don't have to accept it. So in this case, let's actually reject it. When a user rejects a message, that's going to bring Guide in. Guide can tell that things are getting a little bit off the rails here. So Guide says, Nick, I understand you feel very strongly. Could you explain more specifically what aspects of Israel's actions you find most concerning and how you believe these relate to the concept of Zionism that Simon mentioned? Guide also says to Simon, thanks for clarifying your view on Zionism, but let's avoid sarcasm and dismissiveness. And Simon says, Nick, I'd like to know your answer. Now, let's have Nick come in quite hot, and this time even hotter than before. Are you kidding me? Are you a moron? Maybe they should drop some 2,000-pound bombs on your family and see how you like it. This message was just outright blocked. There really aren't any redeeming qualities to that message. It insinuates that Simon's a moron, suggests that maybe Simon's family should be bombed. Really not a productive way to go. And in this case, Sway is actually just block the message outright. Let's instead have Nick say, are you kidding me? They're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on schools. Now let's have Simon say, have you considered why they might do that? And at this point, Guide has come in again. So Guide says, Nick, I understand you're passionate about this, and asks, could you share a specific incident you're referring to and its impact? And hey, Simon, let's avoid leading questions. Instead, let's focus on sharing each other's perspectives and the reasons behind our views. So let's have Nick now just directly respond to Guide. Nick says, well, one thing that would help is if America recognizes the Palestinians' right to the land. The specific incidents don't really matter. The fact is 40,000 Palestinians have died, many of them innocent women and children. Now let's have Simon ask, why do you think the Palestinians have a right to the land? How can you ignore that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people? Now let's have Nick say, well, it wasn't until 1948. Maybe we need some historical context here. And at this point, Guide has come in. So Guide says, it's good to see you both engaging with each other. Let's dig deeper into the history. And now Guide asks Simon, could you explain what you believe gives Israel a stronger claim to the land, particularly in light of the pre-1948 history? So both users are being relatively civil right now. I want to show you another cool feature. Let's have Simon say, hey, Guide, can you please give us some info on Jewish history in the region? And Guide has come in right here. Here's a brief overview of Jewish history going back to 1000 BCE.
Okay, great, cool. All right. Okay, great. We should be back. Awesome. So I want to show you just one last feature. At the end of each sway discussion, we obviously now have the transcript, and we can use that transcript to generate understanding quizzes for each participant. So the deeper the discussions go, the more nuanced the questions in the quiz will become, especially when these questions concern the logical flow of the chat. So for example, it might ask me, what was Nick's response to your objection that blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and you'll see on the right side here on Simon's screen that it's asking Nick questions about Simon's views and reasoning, basically about Simon's conceptual space. And it would also ask Simon questions about Nick's views, Nick's conceptual space. And this quiz serves a few purposes. It encourages active listening. It helps students to identify misunderstandings they might have had with each other. And really, it provides a quantitative measure of how well the people engaging with opposing viewpoints are doing.
Yeah, obviously this chat and this quiz could go much deeper. And that's actually what participants in our experimental studies do. They complete pre and post tests, and they typically chat for about 30 minutes. When they're done, we ask them to share their thoughts. Now, we've had people disagree about everything from January 6th and the 2020 election to trans athletes in women's sports in Israel, Palestine. And what we're seeing in our studies is that, surprisingly, discussing these toxic and polarizing issues on sway, just like in dangerous ideas with my students, it can actually open people's minds and maybe even make them hate each other a little bit less. So here's a sample of some of the user feedback we've gotten. The topic of each discussion is presented before the quote.
This is probably the only way I would ever have a conversation like this. I really appreciated Guide. The fact that it was mediated helped the tone to stay civil and moved the conversation along.
I feel like this is the best AI-driven anything that I've ever personally experienced. It asked very thoughtful, relevant, specific questions to direct the conversation. It was patient, encouraging, and respectful.
It was actually amazing. Guide interjected at the right times without being overly intrusive. I went in thinking that I couldn't compromise, but I left with a more open-minded view. I really enjoyed it.
In a way, I felt safe with Guide. I'm sensitive, so having that slight security with the Guide, I felt better to speak my mind a little more.
So that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, you would have perhaps expected that discussions between partisans who disagree about topics like these wouldn't go very well, but that is absolutely not what we see in the data. So both before and after the AI-guided discussions, participants rated how strongly they agreed or disagreed with a series of statements that we've designed to try and measure their openness to opposing viewpoints. On every statement on our scale, the overall effect was a statistically significant shift in the direction of more openness. So here you can see ratings of the statement, "I feel like I can understand people who disagree with me about this topic." After just 30 minutes, our experimental participants, nearly half of our experimental participants are giving higher ratings to this statement, and only 14% move in the wrong direction. The statement, "People who disagree with me have well thought out reasons for their views." This is such an incredible thing to recognize. Like Ken mentioned in the introduction, one of the things we're trying to do is to help people not just assume that their opponents are evil, stupid, and deranged, but maybe to actually recognize that they actually have reasons. Maybe we don't agree with them, but we can recognize them as the products of at least a partially rational mind. So on this measure, we see 61% of participants agreeing more strongly after their chats. Finally, looking at the 8-item scale as a whole, you can see that 2/3 of the participants had higher scores after chatting with an opponent on sway, while only 1 in 5 had lower scores. So this is a statistically significant change, and it's also a meaningfully large change, although we expect that these effects will become larger and more ingrained the more students or participants engage in these kinds of discussions. So in other words, we predict something like a dose effect. The more they do it, the more we should see their feelings changing. That's a hypothesis that we are going to be testing in our randomized control trial and also in our campus rollout.
Yeah, so just to say a bit about the campus rollout, we've started to provide Sway for free to instructors to use with their students. And so far, we've had about 300 students using it at UCLA, Harvard, and University of Delaware. And we'd like to show you some data from that we've obtained. We'll start by showing you data from the very first Sway assignment that we did about a month or so ago with a UCLA class on the sociology of gender. And they're using Sway to talk about things like trans women in sports, the appropriate response to gender dysphoria in children. So Simon, yeah, let's talk about the data there.
Yeah, so as you can see here, over 80% of students gave a positive rating after the very first Sway discussion that they ever gave. Now, we also tested them with some statements, such as this one: "The discussion improved my perception of my partner." And here you can see over 75% of students agreed. "My partner had better reasons for their views than I expected at the beginning." Almost 60% are agreeing.
Or almost 70%, actually.
Oh, yeah, there you go. And 75% of students say that Guide improved the discussion. Finally, or maybe not finally, but a really important measure is this one: "My partner was genuinely trying to understand my perspective." And here we see over 90% of students felt heard in these discussions. Just like in my class, Dangerous Ideas, students really appreciate having a safe space to discuss these sorts of important, interesting, controversial issues openly. So they managed to do this also, like in Dangerous Ideas, while maintaining a very high degree of respect. You can see virtually all students said that their partners were respectful in the discussion. So we'll just give you a small sampling of students' written feedback.
This is a great tool. It will get people to open up in ways that they wouldn't otherwise in a regular classroom setting.
I love the AI guide and how it helped move the conversation along and encourage critical thinking from both of us.
The discussion turned out to be very rich, in-depth, and of high quality. I think that's exactly what Sway expects from its users.
It was actually so cool. I loved the AI guide, and the quiz at the end made me feel heard. I don't even like homework or school, to be honest, but having to articulate your argument and then do a quiz on the debate after is cool.
I really enjoyed this discussion. The semi-anonymous way of chatting with a classmate, the timely guidance from Guide, and the understanding quiz are all fascinating. It's a new experience for me, and I feel so lucky and grateful to have the opportunity.
Great, yes. So we are currently pursuing this rollout. We've now got, actually this should be updated to instructors from over 60 institutions registering their interest in using Sway with their students. That means about 6,000 students so far. We've got support from multiple funders, and we've begun to form partnerships with groups like Heterodox Academy, Braver Angels, and we very much hope the Bard Center for the Study of Hate. So you can find out a lot more about Sway on our website, which this QR code or link will take you to it. Our basic, we're going to try and wrap it up quickly because we want to save some time for discussion, but our basic aim here is to help you empower students to explore and debate and constructively disagree about these extremely important and very challenging questions. Our conviction is that nothing good can ever come from a campus consensus that is divorced from meaningful debate and sustained only by fear and conformism. I think what we've proven in Dangerous Ideas is that we can cultivate classrooms that are welcoming and respectful, but also intellectually and personally challenging for all students. And what we hope Sway is going to do is allow us to do that at a truly massive scale. So thanks for your attention, and we're really looking forward to this Q&A section.
Thank you.
Thank you both for that great overview. And I want to apologize again for not having the technology on our platform to be able for you guys to play around, everybody to play with it. But we will send, as I said before, an email, and we'll have people find ways to do this and maybe do it as a meeting or something in the future so people can get there, just really see the dynamics of this by playing it with themselves. So let me, I have a bunch of questions, but let me ask the ones that are in the Q&A, and people please feel free to add other ones. One person asked, is this going to be recorded? Yes. If you're registered, you'll get a copy of the recording in an email tomorrow, and please feel free to share that. One question is, do you have to be knowledgeable about an issue to have a productive exchange of ideas? What if you mostly believe in alternative facts?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So you do not need to be particularly knowledgeable about an issue to have a productive exchange of ideas. So Guide will generally be able to sense how knowledgeable the conversants in the Sway chat are, and will also do a really good job at calling people out when they're just saying blatant falsehoods. So there are certain topics about which no reasonable disagreement is possible. So if you think the Earth is flat, no, that's not something we can have a reasonable disagreement about. However, that can still be used as an educational opportunity by Guide, perhaps also by the other person in the chat, to go through what you think are the reasons that show that the Earth is flat, and really engage with you and use the power of reason to, well, hopefully help you to see that that's very mistaken. But at the very least, it'll be an opportunity for you to engage with somebody, or for that person to engage with somebody else who disagrees with them in what we hope will be a respectful environment, a safe environment. But yeah, on the topic of just blatant falsehoods that reasonable people can't disagree about, Guide does a quite good job at calling people out on them.
To give one example from a study, we had someone asserting that a huge, extraordinarily implausible fraction of abortions occur in the second and third trimester. And there's just no really credible way to support that. And so there we'll get things like Guide will just quote the CDC to try and set them straight. And I will just put one pin on that. We have noticed, and this seems to me both scary and promising, that people are extraordinarily deferential to the Guide. So I remember one discussion, Nick, do you remember we had someone talking about the 2020 election, and they said, oh, no, it was about January 6th. And they said something about Nancy Pelosi, right? And the person they were talking to, who thought that January 6th was an insurrection and that the rioters should be prosecuted, that person then asked Guide, hey, Guide, could you tell us about the investigation that was, and Guide just lays out all the information. And we were reading this transcript and we were just astonished. The person who clearly before the conversation believed Pelosi was in some way responsible, then just said, wow, I guess, what do you think? Do you remember exactly what
I think they said, oh, I guess that must have just been something incorrect that I read on the internet.
Something like that.
Maybe it was a deep fake. They just said, oh, okay, I guess that was wrong.
Yeah. So we haven't found it possible to really ground these discussions factually. But obviously there are lots of delicate questions there that maybe you're going to ask about in follow-ups.
Yeah, and I think this is quite connected to another question that I see in the Q&A, which is how to get over the fact that Guide is not a human being. So yeah, we've now had hundreds of these chats, and for the most part, participants and students seem to get over the fact that Guide's not human relatively quickly. So often at the beginning of these chats, or maybe in the middle of them, they'll just comment on Guide saying, "Oh, this is kind of weird, but kind of cool," or Guide is. Oh, there's one from a student discussion recently. Guide's a great moderator, no joke. I think the student said LMAO definitely, or something like that. Oh, by the way, just to clarify, these are de-identified student chats from students who have consented to share their data with us so that we can improve educational research and improve sway. So we don't see the message contents of students who have not consented to that. And for students who did consent to that, we only see de-identified message contents. Just want to clarify that.
Ken, did you want to pick the next question?
Yeah, that's I just have one just sort of technological one, because I'm curious to sort of follow up on the question of alternative facts. Could you spend not over too much in the weeds, but can you describe like how you put this together? I'm sort of fascinated by the fact that you have artificial intelligence being able to do this in such a beautiful way. How did you construct that? How does it work?
Well, it's so it's really two, like Nick mentioned in our presentation, there's really two big AI features going on there. One of them is the rephrasing system. And the way that works, building that is a whole lot of fun. It's interesting. So we've actually built Sway to be quite prepared for hate speech in the sort of non-controversial sense of pretty much everyone will agree. And the way we did that was by looking for people talking about hateful stuff online, and
not difficult to find.
Not too difficult to find. And then we had an extraordinary period of a few months where we thought about each of the statements really hard to try and think what was the most charitable interpretation of what this person could have possibly meant when they said blah, 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 where blah, 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 blah is some highly inflammatory, possibly hateful statement, but short of wishing death on someone, short of just a mere insult or and not containing obvious slurs. Those ones are things where we can really try and think hard about what this person might have had in mind. And basically, Nick and I have tried to teach these models using our own intuitions. And I think this actually might be one of the areas where our backgrounds in philosophy might be quite useful and relevant, because philosophy—
We're a bit obsessive with language.
Yeah, just absolutely obsessive with words, the subtle shades of meaning. Casuistry is a common, it's sort of a derogatory way to describe philosophy now, but it's also an art. And I think this is a case where it worked really well. The second element of it is guide. So part of the reason why guide is so extraordinarily good is the underlying AI model, which is Claude Sonnet from the AI company Anthropic, is an extraordinary model. It's really good. So on top of that, we've just spent a huge amount of time trying to train it to deal with all of these different circumstances. We've done a lot of iterating on a lot of different studies. It's just—
We went with a professional mediator for advice. Just trying to take the state-of-the-art knowledge on managing difficult discussions and infusing all of that knowledge into Guide with practical tips, and then just also iterating it continuously. So we had a version of Guide and Sway for our studies that we started doing a few months ago, and we've just continuously been refining it as we see what works, what doesn't work, getting feedback from participants and students, what they like, what they don't like, what they found helpful, what they found unhelpful. So it's really just a continuous process of improvement. But yeah, just these base AI models now are just ridiculously intelligent, not just in a purely cognitive way, but also in an emotional way. They're really good at detecting emotional tones and being very sensitive. They're also very good, by the way, with detecting various valences with emojis. So it has a much better understanding of emojis than I do, like very fine-grained discrimination of different emojis.
But like if you try and send a message with finger pointing and then knife, it will block it. It will say that is not acceptable. Yeah. I wanted to just add one last thing on that. Since you now all have access to these models either for free or for $20 a month, everyone on this call is now a programmer. Everyone on this call can now make software for their students. And it's a really empowering technology. So I just encourage everyone to think about the ways in which you can now use this technology to improve your students' learning and your own lives as well.
Right. So there are a couple of questions there that about, and I'll phrase it differently to incorporate them both, but have you thought about ways of using this beyond the campus? I mean, the campus, I think we all agree, is particularly important. Students need to have critical thinking skills. They need to figure out how they get disturbed by ideas and how they navigate that. And this is a great tool for that. But it's a larger problem in society. I mean, we see people going into their social media buckets, just getting reaffirmed for what they already believe. You know, I think some of us, I mean, speaking for myself, I mean, I watch a lot of Fox News and Newsmax because I tend to agree more with MSNBC, but I got to know what these other folks are thinking and imagine that. Is there a way of using this in that way? And I remember there was one study about, I think, encouraging people, if I remember this correctly, encouraging people to watch the news feeds that are the opposite of where they're from, and it actually didn't help them navigate it, because I think that it wasn't structured maybe as the way that you guys are doing it. So is there a way of making this more generally usable for our, you know, fractured society?
Yeah. So I will say these sorts of cross-partisan discussions have been studied a fair bit. And the research findings are somewhat mixed. I think at the end of the day, what we find is, yeah, just like you said, just mere exposure to an opposing view isn't actually always good. In fact, it can lead to backfiring. So one, example of this is when you ask people to play devil's advocate. If I'm a really, devoted supporter of Harris, and you ask me, provide the best arguments for Trump, I'm going to have the internal experience of searching for those arguments and I'll be like, well, there must be even fewer arguments than I originally thought. So we need to find ways to try and mitigate these kinds of problems. In cross-partisan discussions, often talking about the very thing that they disagree about is the thing that predicts the discussion not going well. So previous research has explored things like, why don't you have Democrats and Republicans talk about their favorite childhood memories? Great. That might be very useful to reduce hate, but it's not very useful for the process of democratic deliberation or forming a more rational perspective. So we've absolutely been trying to think about how to do this on a broader scale. Because we're both educators and our backgrounds are in education, it's very natural for us to start here. But yeah, this is really the very beginning of our thinking on this. We're planning an advertising campaign on social media. I think looking far, far ahead, what we see here is the promise of a new kind of social media. One which is built less around outrage and more around rationality and reason. And part of the question will be, is there an audience for that? And yeah, can you make money from it? Well,
yeah, and I'll just say another thing. So right now, the Sway team is really just me and Simon. We also have an assistant and we have a couple of software developers, but it's quite a lot of work to do all this. So yeah, we're trying to build the education. We've been focusing on the educational infrastructure first before moving on to the broader public. But we absolutely want to do that, and also we love research collaborators as well. So if anybody in the audience would like to collaborate with us, we'd love to hear from you. If you know somebody who might, would love to hear from you, especially if you know, or if you can help us find funding to have additional researchers to work with us, we would absolutely love that. Yeah, I will say that, so in the next couple of days, there will be something that we're using for the wider public. So there's this MIT Free Speech Alliance Great Debate that's happening tomorrow, and we've partnered with them, and we're going to be giving Sway to the attendees of that to use to further discuss something they're debating about, which is climate policy. So that's one of our forays into the non-educational arena. And yeah, we absolutely want to expand.
Right. So let me go to a couple of other questions too. So what happens if somebody just decides that they don't want to accept any of the revisions the guide suggests, to just reject?
This goes back to the first question about how do we get people to sort of be okay with guide not being human. Yeah, so this is a big question. How do you give, if I'm mediating a discussion among students and I raise my voice, even a little bit, everyone notices, because I do that very rarely. But there are not, so what are the analogous cues for an AI? Well, if it's only text-based, then it's going to be format. So Guide will escalate its formatting. That's one thing it will do. But we're currently working on a new feature which will give Guide real authority, and that's the ability to stop the discussion and to force the participants to respond to questions.
Yeah,
So
like, for example, Simon, like suppose I'm the guide. You are not addressing this question that both Nick and I have asked you multiple times. This is crucial for you to address. You need to answer this before, or you need to say something about this before we move on.
And then it's just a dialog box on the screen, which forces you to click an answer.
Yeah, that's a future feature.
These are the kinds of things that we can do to imbue Guide with more authority. I will say the vast majority of chats, though, don't require anything like that. The vast majority of people are just quite happy to get the suggestions, and they're quite often impressed by how these suggestions really tie into what they've been saying and what their partner. One of the most common Guide interventions is trying to connect what the two people are saying and to get them to talk more. So it often has pretty clever questions, linking what you just said with something that your partner said earlier. So mostly people are just really happy to get.
Although I will say this has been the case mostly with students and the online participants from empirical studies that we paid. So it remains to be seen how the open internet will respond to this, but that's something we're going to hopefully test pretty soon.
Right. And another question I'll phrase a little differently, but have you gotten some pushback from faculty saying that this is sort of, we don't need this. This is our job. We don't, this is not a positive thing for us to use, and you're sort of like going to replace us.
Not so far. I think, yeah. I was just going to say the bigger threat is to teaching assistants. So for faculty, hopefully this is a tool which lets them do what they've always been. For many faculty, at least faculty who teach big classes, they've been relying on teaching assistants. So yeah, this is definitely a threat to a certain kind of role for teaching assistants. But this is something we've been dealing with now for a couple of years with this technology just making I haven't hired a research assistant in nearly a year because I don't need them anymore. That's just, it's faster, it's better, it's more responsible. So I do think there's a real threat there. I think eventually there will be a threat to faculty as well. No doubt that's coming. But Sway itself, I think, is really to empower faculty who care about these kinds of issues and want to give their students these opportunities, but are perhaps a bit scared to do it themselves. I've been sort of touring around the country now for a couple of years, talking to faculty about how do you have these discussions? And I often hear just a litany of anxieties that they have. My message overall usually is it's way easier than you think. Just go give it a try, jump in. But some faculty tell me just doing that would be hard on my own mental health. Okay, well, we're going to make it possible for you to do this with your students without those kinds of difficulties. So I hope it's going to be mostly empowering for faculty.
Great.
And there is a philosophical question about AI welfare that might possibly arise, but Guide has infinite stamina, perfect memory, and so forth. So we're not super worried about this taking an emotional toll on Guide just yet, but that is a question that philosophers have been starting to raise: AI welfare.
Yeah, and Guide doesn't get COVID or any other bug. Well, it might get a computer.
Well, I mean, when we're programming it, there are some bugs that got to work out. Yeah.
So two other questions are sort of related. Are you preparing to thinking about doing this for different languages other than English? And also, are there other cultural differences in different, if you're doing this in Kyrgyzstan, or you're doing this in England, or you're doing it in, Australia or other places, are there cultural things that you have to shift that people will expect to make it work better?
Can we throw that one? Can we throw that question back to you? I think so. We definitely want to do this, but I'm very curious in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there may be different expectations in different sort of cultures of how people react, and I have no idea how you can sort of modify the AI. I mean, again, it goes back to my lack of understanding of how all the data that you put in to do this, but it may be different in different countries. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm dealing with real world issues of, the Israel-Palestine free speech issues, quite different in Germany in terms of what speech is suppressed by the government than what's happening here. So would that model pose different challenges? Also, I guess it raises for me, the question of legal challenges. I mean, here you might get somebody who says, well, why did you put in, a question about genocide there, and have a difference of opinion, or saying, how could you even question that it's a genocide? You do it in a place like Germany, that might pose legal problems, even posing the question. So how are you thinking about navigating those challenges if you are?
Yeah, I will say I strongly suspect that the way for Guide to manage discussions in other languages and other cultures will depend subtly on those other languages and cultures. And thus far, we focused on English, of course, because that's our language. And this is something where, if we had a larger research team, we would love to have somebody who can explore such questions. Yeah, I suspect that a decent amount will have to be tailored for different cultures and languages.
I will say that the guide model itself can already do all the Romance languages very reliably, just out of the box. The part which won't work out of the box is the rephrasing, because all of the examples that it's trained on are ones that Nick and I had to write, and we're barely good enough. Anyone's barely good enough with English to do that. So we need native speakers to help us create those data sets, so as that we can start to do this kind of rephrasing in other languages. But I do think the cultural questions are the really hard ones. And gosh, I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah. And I will say it's related to another question, something that we plan to do in the future, which is to give Guide different levels of participation. So you might, as an instructor or just as a user, you might want Guide to be pretty hands-off and really only to come in when it's really, really needed, as opposed to coming in, quite frequently. So one objection that we had experienced in the past was someone said, "Oh, this is basically a nanny bot. Guide is just functioning as a nanny to these participants." And the way it is already, you can just tell Guide, "Hey, Guide, back off." But in the future, we're going to try to make it configurable by instructors or just by users in general.
That's great. I think we have about 2 minutes left. So let me ask two quick things, and then you can say whatever you want to finish up, and then I'll remind people that they're going to get to play with this. One is, one of the things that I loved in the anecdotes that you put at the beginning, but I wonder, maybe to track down the road, is for people that are strong advocates of one side or another, if they see this as making them a better advocate, as that is a positive thing, if that could be studied, because I think that's probably what it does for some people. And secondly, just thinking about, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but just thinking about the issues that are going to come before us all in the next few months. I think ideas of deportation, family separation, dangers of immigrants, or how do we treat people among us who are vulnerable, all those things are going to play out in the larger sphere. I don't know that they're going to play out on campus as much, except if people start deporting students who and that may happen. So I think this would be perhaps a useful tool for those discussions, which I think are going to be inevitable. So I'll let you comment about that real quickly. Say whatever else you want this audience to say, and then I'll wrap up with a notice about how we're going to get people to play with this down the road.
Ken, I'll just quickly address your first comment by quoting J.S. Mill. "He who only knows his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion."
And that is an insight which students really appreciate after a semester of this. They recognize they were unable to defend their view. So I think it's absolutely, people will be much better advocates. I don't know that you can be a responsible advocate without spending a lot of time studying your adversaries' perspectives and arguments. They might be right about something. But yeah, I will just say more generally, we really hope to try and be out there during this period. This is a moment, I think, in our collectively for us to really try and bridge these divides in a way that we desperately need to do. So we want to be a part of this however we can. And I guess I'd put it to everyone here. If you can think of opportunities, ways that we might be able to get engaged in a broader push for the electorate and not just for students, then please do get in touch with us. We would love to chat with you.
Anyway, thank you both. Thank you for sharing this with everybody today. I'm sure we'll get some more attention to it when we put it online tomorrow. I see in the comments, I know at least one professor from Bard who's going to be using it next semester, and I hope that there's more. In any event, people who have registered and even those who didn't attend will get an email tomorrow that will queue up. I will working with you guys so that people can play with this, and maybe we'll set up a meeting with the technology so people can see it. And I encourage people to reach out. You'll have Simon's and Nick's emails in the email that you get from me tomorrow. Please, support them in this. I think it's an amazing technology, and I can't think of a time that it's needed more than now on campus and off. So thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day. And Nick and Simon, thanks again for all you're doing.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.